Okay, so today we are doing another Dear Authors, which I'll have the series linked up there and in the description if you're new to this series. But basically, it's a series where readers chat with readers about what we like and don't like to see in books. This time we're talking about middle books, which seems to be one that is hard to do. The phrase middle book syndrome comes up a lot, and the middle book can oftentimes be a lot of people's least favorite in the series. Some people love middle books, some people don't. I have a lot of opinions on middle books and why I think a lot of times they struggle. I've read through the comments, and it seems like the comments are fairly repetitive. It seems like we as readers all agree in large part on why middle books sometimes struggle and what makes some middle books great. So I'm gonna read some of these comments. I'm probably not gonna get through a ton of them in this video because, like I said, they were really repetitive. We seem to be in large part in agreement here. And I'll also share some of my thoughts. So I did post on my community tab asking what you like and don't like about sequel books, what makes them great, what makes them not great. And the most upvoted #1 comment in that thread is also the comment that was repeated the most throughout this thread, and that is, I hate when sequels completely disregard the character development in previous books. Giving the character the same arc twice, for example, is exhausting to read about. This came up so often, and that's because it comes up so often in books. One thing that I've noticed with sequels, with the middle book, is oftentimes the first book is ground laying, and then the last book is conclusion. It's bringing everything to a head. It's the climax. It's how everything ends, and then how we're left with the story. And then the middle book a lot of times is just filling in the blanks, or something needs to be more developed to get to the last book, but not enough needs to be developed to justify an entire book. So a lot of times there's one thing that needs to be accomplished before we can get to the third book, and we focus on that one thing, but then everything else is just used as filler. And a lot of times if it's, for instance, character development that needs to happen, or if an author decides they want to strengthen the relationship before we get to the last book, the romantic relationship that's been a subplot, or whatever it is, that maybe they want to expand the world more or expand the magic system more before they have the final battle with epic magic fights. Whatever the thing is, a lot of times that'll make the filler content, the rest of the middle book, a lot of repetitive things or pointless things happening. So the character's emotional arc can be torn down and repeated again. We already had a huge emotional arc in this book where the character went from here to here, and now we're just gonna renege a lot of that, bring them back down, and then make them experience that same arc again. Or the plot will happen again. Different villain, exact same conflict, also the villain's acting pretty similar, also the way they take it down the villain is really similar too, but we had some character development. It's fine to need to bring the characters to a certain point or to expand the world to a certain point in order to get to book 3, but if we're just reneging things, if we're just tearing down the progress that we've already made or repeating the progress that we've already made so that this one element can be built up, overall, it's gonna be a pretty disappointing book. Please follow Sanderson's third rule. Expand on what you already have before adding something new. Don't just add things in because they sound cool. Build upon your established methods. If you have any cool ideas that you want to add in later, hint at them in your story. Foreshadowing makes you seem much more thoughtful as a storyteller, and I personally love it. So basically, if you have something that you plan on expanding on in book 2, give us little nuggets of it in book 1. Enough that maybe we won't see, oh, you're gonna do this. Just a little mentioning of something, just little conversations, just little moments that are enough to stick out in our minds, so when we get to book 2, we say, oh, that's what that thing was about. Then it makes the author look good because we're impressed, and it makes us feel satisfied because it feels like we're reading a fully fleshed story that feels real instead of something that's just, you know, we're tossing things around now. Just add that because why not? And add that because why not? Foreshadowing is a beautiful thing, and man, we love it. Unnecessary relationship issues, like introducing a new character for the sole purpose of a love triangle. If done well, it can be interesting to see the characters grow and develop, but often it's a side character with no personality traits except home-wrecking and attraction to the main character. So this is specifically about love triangles, but I also got a lot of comments about characters, about relationships breaking up. We spend an entire subplot of book 1, or plot of book 1, bringing two people together, and then in book 2, some unnecessary conflict happens, they break up, or now there's a love triangle, or now there's some sort of shallow, useless conflict, just so that the relationship has conflict because we have to have something happening here because we need to build this thing up. So I guess the relationship that'll be something that we focus on for page fillers. It's okay for relationships, for couples to have down moments and for real conflict to happen, for real issues to arise in this relationship that we've built up. It's not like we need a relationship to be built up and then those characters are perfect and they have a perfect relationship with no conflict. That's nonsense. Relationships have conflict. But shallow, useless, we've seen this a million times, conflict just for the sake of conflict that doesn't actually serve any purpose in the story. We just need something to share page time because this one thing I need to build up, it doesn't take up enough pages. This is so frustrating. Okay, this next one, the thing that they don't like is in agreement with stuff that we've already discussed, so I'm putting this up here just to talk about what they love, and that's when the author goes deeper into characters' mindset. Since we know how their mind works, we can focus more on, let's say, the trauma they went through in the first book, or who they lost, or what their regrets are. I love this too because we can only get so much out of a first book. No matter how big this book is, the first book is a lot of ground laying unless it's a standalone. So by the second book, we know these characters, we trust these characters, and diving much deeper into who they are is so satisfying as a reader. I love sequels that deal with the consequences of the characters achieving their goal in the previous book and the negative aspects of their victory. Though apart from that, the sequel should have additional conflict because sequels which have very minor conflicts tend to be quite boring. I agree with this. I love when we spend a whole arc in book 1 accomplishing some sort of goal. There's still more story to tell, but there was still an arc in book 1 that happened. And then book 2, if we pick up right where we left off and we get to see the fallout, because nothing is perfect. Nothing just makes things all better. Maybe there's emotional trauma that comes with it. Maybe there was fallout with side characters between the main character. Maybe there were issues within the civilization and now things need to be cleaned up. But being able to see what happens after that arc as we're building up the next thing is a great way to show conflict, to show that everything's not perfect, and to be able to have something to balance out whatever it is that you're needing to build up more in your sequel. And I also agree that having a sequel that is conflict-less, that either has really shallow, repetitive conflict or just none whatsoever, and it's just, oh, we're building up the relationship, beefing it up a little bit more before the third book. It's not fun to read. It's not exciting. When they shoot ahead and the characters are unrecognizable, it's rather irritating when your favorite character suddenly becomes your least favorite because they changed in the apparent 100 years they skipped ahead. Or like if there's a war and 2 years later, everyone is fine and dandy with each other. Just in general, this seems to be a comment that came up a lot in this thread. People not really liking a huge time jump between book 1 and book 2. And I agree with that. I think it can be done well, so it's not like this is the worst thing ever, but it has to be done really, really intentionally, because if we've spent an entire book with characters and we love them and we're attached to them and we know them well, and then we have several years later and now they've either changed so much that we have to get to know them and we feel like we've lost time with them and we've lost our connection with them, or they're exactly the same several years later, so their arc just paused. They just stopped developing the world stopped developing. The people and the worlds are exactly the same years later. Either there's so much change that we've lost our connection, or there's none and it doesn't make sense. In general, it's really nice to pick up where we left off and feel like we're continuing the story with the characters instead of having been left behind by the characters. Like I said, it can be done well, but in general, it's really nice to pick up where we left off. Like When the characters have genuinely learned from the mistakes they made in the first book, whether that be not understanding the villain or simply being careful to turn the hob off. Don't repeat mistakes because it's samey, unrealistic, and makes the characters seem stupid. Dislike. When the entire thing is literally a transition from the first book, oh, look here, there's an issue I need to fix, and the third book, oh, look, I fixed it. Give them small victory and defeats to keep us invested and make us feel like there's something at stake. Heck, kill off a few characters if you must. Don't just stop the majority of the plot because you need to make it last. So for the like, we're obviously just talking about character development. We like when the character learns from their mistakes and they're not repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again, book after book after book. If a character isn't growing, we get tired of them really fast. It's so satisfying when I have 3 or more books with a character and I feel like I can see how distinct their personality, how distinct their decisions were in each book because they've grown with me as I've read with them, and I can see a really satisfying arc. But if from book 1 to book 6, I'm basically still looking at the same character, making the same mistakes, being just as immature, looking at you, Vampire Academy, it's so frustrating, and I get tired of reading it. And for the dislike, I really like this one too because it's basically saying we need more than one driving plot. There can be one overarching thing that the characters are fighting against, but small victories, small little plots that we're also accomplishing. Basically, if a book can have a full arc in and of itself, that's so satisfying. I think Sanderson does this really, really well, especially in the Mistborn trilogy, when book 1 felt like its own complete arc, and yet the way it ended, you saw that there was a bigger arc that needed to be accomplished over 3 books, and yet book 1 was satisfying on its own. I need to read more because I need to know what that last line was, what that last section was, what all this is going to lead to. There's still tension, there's still a need to see how we're going to complete this overarching thing that we're facing. But each individual book feels complete in its own as well, and it doesn't feel like nothing has progressed because there's only one conflict. Having little conflicts, little achievements makes each story feel satisfying, yet I need more. Dear authors, a sequel is weakened when the focus becomes more on the subplots than the main plot. Love interests, side activities, and all should deepen and contribute to the main plot rather than steal its spotlight. I'm just gonna name names. Renegades. Book 1 was really fun. I enjoyed it a lot. Book 2 did nothing but further the relationship. We did 500 pages of putting muscles on the relationship with nothing else practically. I get that the author wanted to put muscles on the relationship before the final book, and it would have been hard to make the relationship feel realistic to have that much growth in only a duology. But the thing is, if a 500-page book, or really any page book, is devoted almost entirely to beefing up a relationship or some other side thing and nothing else, we see it, we notice. Either there's enough material for 3 books or there's not. And if there's not, then maybe that side plot doesn't need to be as big of a deal in the series as it is. If it doesn't fit cohesively with the rest of the book, then maybe it needs to back off and not be as important. I hate when the supposedly dead villain comes back to life, just for the point of the second book. Unless it's written well, this really gets on my nerves. Yeah, I don't need to expand on this. That's terrible. And I'm going to end on this one. Dear authors, please stop changing the personality of a love interest completely in the sequel to get them out of the picture for your endgame couple. So many viable love interests turn into jerks in the sequels or finales of series just because the author doesn't know how else to end a love triangle. This is not exclusively a book problem. I don't watch very much TV or movies, but in what little I've watched, oh my goodness, have I seen this a lot in all forms of content, it seems. The writer is done with a character, so they completely change their personality so that the readers, so that the consumers will be okay with dropping the character abruptly. Or there's conflict around either a triangle or just a relationship in general, even if it's not a romantic one. And there's not a simple, easy, convenient way to resolve that, so we're just gonna change a character's personality. It's the worst, and it doesn't only happen in the middle book. This comment probably doesn't even fit in this video, but I'm including it because it's so common in all forms of media, and I do not understand it. We can tell, we see what's happening, we hate it. So that's all I have for this video. Like I said, the comments were so repetitive, but I recommend going and checking out that community tab if you haven't already and reading through them. There's a lot of good stuff there, but it seems like we agree on a lot of what we're discussing on this topic. And it's basically, we don't like authors to renege on what they've done. We don't like characters to have zero development or to have repetitive development. We also don't like plots to have repetitive development. And we don't like false, shallow, filler content or conflict. If something needs to be built up more, there needs to be more than just that one thing progressing that middle book. And if there's nothing else that can happen to progress that middle book, then dial back on this one thing that needs more development. It probably just doesn't need to be such a focal point in the other two books. Basically, just give it substance. We like substance. All around substance, not just substance in one factor and then filler content for the rest. Sequels are hard to write. They can also be hard to read, but they can also be the most satisfying book in the series. Thank you again, everybody that participates in these videos. I really enjoy the community aspect of this and us all coming together and being able to discuss. Be sure to continue the discussion in the comments. I post videos every Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.